Good Monday morning to you. Yeah, my point of view is the United States has two adversaries and one enemy. Our adversaries are the Chinese Communist Party and the government of Vladimir Putin, and our enemy is the Islamic Republic of Iran. There's a piece involving all three in the Jerusalem Post written by a couple of friends of mine. Victoria Coates is a senior fellow at the Center for Security Policy and the former U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor for Middle Eastern and North American Affairs. Len Khodorkovsky is the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Digital Strategy. He is the man behind the messaging, senior advisor to the U.S. Special Representative for Iran. They both know what they're doing, but they have both seemed to downplay the real threat of the revitalized JCPOA, which is, of course, Joe Biden's overriding agreement, and of Iran's deal with China. Good morning, Len and Victoria. How are you? Victoria, let's start with you. How are you doing?
Good morning, Hugh. I'm very well. How are you?
Great, great, great. Len, everything good with you?
Thank you very much, Hugh. Good to be with you.
You know, the staff doesn't think I can pronounce Khodorkovsky, and I know how to do it because of Hodor in the Game of Thrones. I just remember Hodor, and then I go to Khodorkovsky. Do you think that works for other people?
That's easy. Works for me here.
Works for you. All right. Why don't I worry about Iran and China? I saw that, and I brought it up to a friend of mine who told me I was too hard on China or the Chinese Communist Party in the Post last week, and they said, don't worry about the Iran deal. And I worry about the Iran deal. Victoria, why not?
Well, I think you're spot on, Hugh. I mean, I worry about both the Communist Chinese and the Islamic Republic of Iran. And I think, though, where people are getting this backwards is the JCPOA and the China deal are not in any way going to save Iran. I don't know if you saw the IMF report where they're down to something like $4 billion in currency reserves. That's not a tenable situation. I think Afghanistan has 11. So they are melting down, literally, and the JCPOA isn't going to save them. No reasonable company is going to invest in Iran right now. And the China deal isn't enough money. I mean, $400 billion over 25 years is not going to save that place. So what Len and I are proposing is a real deal, something that will provide relief to the Iranian people, not just be a lifeline for the mullahs. And that's what we mean by the Cyrus Accords.
We've talked about the proposed Cyrus Accords before, and may it come to pass. But Len, I think Iran is becoming like North Korea. They announced 60% uranium enrichment last week after their Natanz facility managed to blinker out for a long time and destroy a lot of their centrifuges. And that just reminds me of North Korean, quote, diplomacy over the years, which is to rattle sabers and threaten in order to try and get some bailout money. Is that what's going on in Tehran?
Well, there's no doubt that the mullahs are playing the only card that they have, which is nuclear escalation. But in the end, they do know that there's no way that the United States, Israel, or any of our allies will permit Iran to become a nuclear power. That's just a recipe for disaster. It is the single most destabilizing force in the region, and they know that. They know that. So they're basically playing the Biden administration because, I mean, what do you expect when the administration's top priorities are diversity and climate? I mean, they're setting themselves up for disaster. And I would just add this, Hugh, that all of this talk about the deal or no deal, JCPOA 2.0 or not, is missing the point. It's not about the deal. It's about United States national security. JCPOA 1.0 did not secure our nation, nor will JCPOA 2.0, and we should focus on what's important here, and that is to strengthen our national security by weakening the world's top state sponsor of terrorism.
I agree with that. Now, Victoria, when a car is totaled, it's not normally repaired, and the JCPOA was totaled even before the Trump team took over, but it's truly a wreckage now. They're trying to rehabilitate it. I don't think it's going to work. And John Kerry was in China preaching climate stuff. To me, this is the biggest diplomatic crisis. We're in the 1930s. The Rhineland is upon us. We're going to see China do something crazy before long. Do you agree with my rather dire assessment of the world right now?
Well, it's certainly a tough time, Hugh. I mean, we have, don't forget about the Russians on the borders of Ukraine. We have, China eyeing Taiwan, and we have the Iranians enriching at 60%. I mean, this has taken them less than 100 days to get to three major crises simultaneously, none of which they seem prepared to deal with. And in terms of the Iran deal, I completely agree. I mean, I think it was fraudulently negotiated from the get-go. It's defunct. There's no point in going back in unless you think you can use it as some kind of bargaining chip with China to get to a climate deal, which, as Len said, is clearly the top priority. And it's just backwards. I mean, we left them with absolutely historic economic pressure on Iran, which is what I was just talking about, that nothing like that had been done before. What they should have done is, if they were going to talk to them, say, look, nothing's coming off, nothing's moving. As a matter of fact, we're going to make it worse until you renounce hostilities with Israel, the United States, and your neighbors. Very simple. That's all you have to do. That's the basis of the peace deals with Egypt and Jordan, and then with the historic Abraham Accords from last year. You just renounce hostility, and then all things are possible. But no, they didn't do that.
Khomeiniism will never allow that to happen, I'm afraid. And so you're talking about regime change. And even though the Quds Force #2 had a heart attack, so that's 2 out of 3 in the last 2 years for them, I'm just not an optimist. Len, do you think President Xi and President Putin talk to each other? Because it does seem to me that when you've got those divisions on the border with Ukraine, actually within Ukraine on the new border with Ukraine, and you've got the incursions into Taiwan airspace that the Chinese Communist Party is routinely ordering now, there may be a bit of coordination going on between our adversaries about the morsels in their path.
I think they talk to each other, but I don't think they trust each other. I think that mistrust goes back decades. And even though they're both communist regimes, I think they have their own self-serving agendas. And I assume that there might be some heads up on the things that you mentioned, just as there might be heads up from the Israelis to the Russians in Syria when they bomb Iranian outposts. But practically speaking, I don't think they're buddies, and they'll collaborate when they need to, but I don't think there's any trust between them.
Now, Len, you are a product of the Soviet Union. People don't know that you were born in the Soviet Union and emigrated to the United States as a young lad. And you're right, there's a historic enmity between the Russian Empire and the Chinese Empire that suggests they would not get along for long. But they don't have to get along for long. If Russia wants to go east and China wants to go towards Taiwan, right, they can do that fairly quickly. Russia goes west, excuse me.
That's what they would like to do, but I don't think they need each other's permission to act on those impulses. Look, there's a big check on what any authoritarian regime does, and that is the moral clarity of the position of the United States. And so when authoritarians all over the world feel that the United States is retreating, is sending a signal of weakness, they will act with boldness. And that is an important thing for us to consider as we're, trying to figure out a way to deal with the Russians and the Chinese. I mean, for the Russians, our European friends need to help us out. They have to stop the Nord Stream 2 project. They can't, on one hand, complain about Russia, and on the other hand, finance them. And China, same thing. China and Europe have discussed a long-term deal, and our European friends cannot look the other way on the threats coming from the Chinese communists for the sake of commercial gain.
Now, Victoria, if the mullahs are down to $8 billion in reserves, do the Chinese communists do a Belt and Road initiative and lifeline them the cash they need in exchange for, oil for the next 20 years? Is that what's going to happen here?
Well, that's certainly what China wants to do, Hugh, and for them, it's a cheap gas station, basically. And I think the Iranian people need to know that $400 billion is not going to go into roads and infrastructure and healthcare and all the things they desperately need. It will be funneled by the mullahs into their Swiss bank accounts and then into their terrorist proxies. I don't know if you saw that Hezbollah, for example, suddenly in Lebanon has started their version of Costco. You have to apply to Hezbollah to be a supporter and prove that you're a supporter. Then you get a card. Then you eat. So essentially, the regime in Tehran right now is deciding who eats in Lebanon, which is a nasty little habit they have. They use it in Yemen as well. But the Chinese investments in Iran will all be things that further China's interests. So it's not going to address their climate catastrophe. It's not going to address their water crisis. It's all going to be things that advance China's interests. So as I said, this isn't going to fix anything for Iran. It is just a lifeline to the mullahs, and we've seen it coming to pass over the last 6 weeks with the increased illicit oil sales to China, to which the administration is turning a blind eye. That is basically what is financing Tehran and what's giving them the chutzpah, if you will, to drive such a hard bargain in Vienna, even when they are in such economic distress.
Len Kornakovsky, last word to you. It appears to me as though we're really signaling weakness. Weakness is provocative. John Kerry is doing climate negotiations even as China threatens Taiwan and the Philippines, although they've withdrawn their boats from Whitsun Reef now. Has this administration signaled already, and I mean irrevocably so, that the window of opportunity is open for the world's most predatory states?
I believe so, but let me level set this for folks. China is, or I should say, the Chinese Communist Party is perpetrating genocide right now in Xinjiang against a Uyghur Muslim population. There are over 1 million Uyghur Muslims in concentration camps. So imagine talking climate to the Nazi regime in the 30s or 40s when they were embarking on the final solution. I mean, this is just to put things in perspective, not to mention all those threatening actions that you described regarding Taiwan, Hong Kong, Belt and Road. By the way, Belt and Road isn't all it's cracked up to be. It's a long road of broken promises and abandoned
it's a
infrastructure
noose.
deals.
It's a noose. But did anybody ask John Kerry? Have you either of you seen John Kerry get asked one question about the genocide declaration, which, by the way, has been endorsed by Tony Blinken, who appears to be an attaché to John Kerry?
That would be terribly bad manners, Hugh. I can't imagine anyone would trouble Mr. Kerry with something like that.
I'm astonished John Kerry went, but he did. And the Cyrus Accords are a great idea, but we're going to need a new administration before someone embraces the Eisenhower dictum. If you want to solve a problem, make it larger. Len Kordakovsky and Victoria Coates, always a pleasure, you two. Keep sending me the stuff when you put it out there. I appreciate it very much.